Despite having studied and worked in Hong Kong, which is just a 1-hour ferry ride away from Macau, I'd somehow never visited. Many know it as the Vegas of the East, but I'm not a fan of casinos or flashy cityscapes, so I've never had much interest. But I couldn't have been more wrong about Macau for thinking that it was all it had to offer. Macau was among the first European colonies in Asia and the last to leave. After nearly 450 years of Portuguese rule, it was returned to China in 1999. The street signs are in Portuguese and Chinese, churches are adorned with lanterns, and the cuisine is considered the world's first fusion food. It's a true melting pot of histories, traditions, and people. So let me take you on a journey through Macau and get to know the city through its iconic past. Our story begins at this historical hotel where I'll be staying for my trip. Built in 1928, Hotel Central rose to become Macau's grandest hotel. At 11 floors, it was not only the tallest building in Macau at the time, but also in the entire Portuguese Empire. Its halls welcomed diplomats, gangsters, and spies alike, their lives briefly intersecting over clattering chips on the casino floors. Inside, there was lavish rooms, expansive dance halls, and of course, the city's most captivating women. Ian Fleming, the creator of James Bond, described it as
the world's largest gambling and self-indulgence parlor, dedicated exclusively to so-called human vices.
Danger and thrill dance hand in hand here. Knowing the hotel housed the city's wealthiest patrons, gangsters threatened bombings to extort ransom, and a few times they actually carried them out. In 1946, the hotel's owner and Macau's richest man, Phutak Lam, was kidnapped for months, losing part of his ear during the ransom negotiations. Patrons sometimes tossed coins from the rooftop, and the hungry below scrambled for their scraps. The hotel formed the thin divide between opulence and poverty. It grew worse during World War II when refugees from Guangzhou and Hong Kong poured into Macau to escape the Japanese occupation. Under the Portuguese, Macau remained neutral during the war, and the city's population swelled from about 200,000 to nearly 1 million. At that time, Macau covered only about 12 square kilometers. At the peak of the influx, that meant roughly 80,000 people per square kilometer, which is twice the density of today's most crowded city, Manila in the Philippines. Amidst this chaos, Japanese soldiers crossed over from Hong Kong to Hotel Central to indulge in food, drinks, gambling, and of course, women. They brushed shoulders with locals and allied officials alike, all while fully aware that the chaos around them is caused by the action of their troops. The tension was palpable in a city caught at the crossroads between the East and the West. It was the worst of times, but also the golden era of Hotel Central. A place where worlds collided, it mirrored Macau itself, an open port that welcomed all and allowed histories to intertwine. By the 1960s, Macau's gaming king Stanley Ho had taken over the main casino license.
個書字都好少肯接受。
Hotel Central's casino was forced to close, losing its main source of revenue, and the building fell into decades of neglect. It was only last year that the hotel completed years of renovation and reopened to the public. We are now in the new Central Hotel here right in the middle of Old Macau. It is such a beautiful hotel. The hotel offers a complimentary tour that takes you across the complex and provides you with the historic background of Macau and how that links with the hotel. It was so interesting to see how the design of each floor played a tribute to different decades in Macau's history. The 5th and 6th floor represent 1920s Macau. It has a minimalist style and a cozy vibe that takes you back to the times when it was a small, quiet port town compared to booming Hong Kong. The 7th and 8th floors represent the 1930s. The dark theme reflects the mood of the wartime era where people had to flee Japanese-occupied China to Macau. The cherry on the details is the kerosene lamps which was used to replace electricity during the war. The 9th and 10th floors represent the 1940s. It feels much more modern and brighter up here, representing the lift in people's moods when the war had finally ended. From the 11th floor rooftop, the historic city of Macau unfolds before you. In the distance, you'll see Stanley Ho's casino, the Grand Lisboa, which is now the tallest building in Macau. But the surrounding buildings are mostly low-lying flats that survived the changes over the decades. Unlike mainland China, where land rights do not permit full private ownership, Macau's permanent land rights help to protect the original form of these streets and safeguard the city's unique past. It all started with the hunt for food at Senado Square, Macau's historic center, which turned out to be a surprisingly tricky task after 10 p.m.
There's only like pharmacies and maybe some beef jerky places that are open, and everything else seems to be closed. This is about the top pharmacy that I've seen. Look, there's another one. It's so different from mainland China because, you know, yesterday we were in just Zhuhai and so many of the restaurants around where we stayed were open till at least 2 a.m.
I was super hangry, but the silver lining is that I stumbled upon one of Macau's most iconic landmarks and almost had it all to myself.
This is one of those things where you can see a million photos of, but you really have to go to the place itself to be able to really witness how grand it is. And I'm just looking back at it right now and I just feel so small. I can only imagine what a sight it must have been when it was first built in the 1600s.
A typhoon 200 years ago destroyed most of the church, leaving only the grand staircase and the carved stone facade. What makes this church super unique is that it's such a mosaic of Eastern and Western cultural influences. Not only do you have Chinese dragons carved alongside figures like the Virgin Mary, but there's also inscriptions in Latin, Portuguese, and Chinese. What's more, it was also the home of the first Western-style university in China, the Jesuits College. The Jesuits really did right with this one because they didn't just come and attempt to dump their ideologies among the locals, but they also learned and studied Chinese language, philosophies, including Confucian texts and histories, seeking to understand the culture before attempting to guide or influence it. Meanwhile, the local students learned about Western science, math, and philosophy. I came back to this area again during the day, and it just wasn't the same.
We are back at the streets leading up from Senado Square, and during the day it's a completely different scene than at night. It's so crowded right now and so many shops are open. You can tell this is a very touristy location and I really cannot stand the crowd, so I'm gonna hide away in one of the more smaller back alleys.
If you want a more serene experience, I just recommend coming at night. A short walk from St. Paul's brings you to New Fulham Street, or as the Portuguese called it, Rua de Felicidade, meaning the Street of Happiness. Pastel green buildings now line shops selling souvenirs and food. But over a century ago, this was Macau's red light district, buzzing with brothels, gambling houses, and opium dens. Here, much like the geishas in Japan, women were often trapped by circumstances and became skilled entertainers fluent in music, poetry, and the art of seduction. Westerners at the time called them sing-song girls, as the girls were entertainers rather than strictly prostitutes. A passage from the book of a renowned Macanese author offered a rare glimpse into their lives in 1930s and 40s Macau. He described a 17-year-old sing-song girl entering into a ceremonial sale of her virginity. She displayed modesty, but at the same time, she left behind her a trace of eroticism that was hard to describe. All that money used to buy and educate her had not been spent in vain. Her long hours of teaching, during which there had been no shortage of beating and other torturous punishment, produced a result that exceeded all expectations. And the sale of her virginity for a good price partially compensated for all her cares. After World War II, prostitution and opium was outlawed in Macau, and the Street of Happiness quietly shed its notorious reputation. By 1996, the street's buildings were restored, businesses set up shop. But if you just turn a corner, you'll see alleyways that remain untouched, offering a rare glimpse into the city's residential heart. A few blocks away is the Dom Pedro V Theatre, the first Western-style theater in China. Carefully preserved, it was and still is a hub for social and civic life. But what really caught my eye was the adjoining Theaters Association. This place is both serious and absurd. Like, what do you mean this is a shrine of Mao up against disco lights and Barbies? Why is there another shrine dedicated to Sun Yat-sen in the side room under this creepy lighting? And why is there a random parrot? My eyes and ears didn't know what to make of this place. It felt like an over-exaggeration of Chinese patriotism with a theatrical twist. Inside, there was another exhibition dedicated to Macau's return to China. There was newspaper clippings of Macau's 1999 handover, marking the end of 442 years of Portuguese colonial rule and the last European colony in Asia. What I found interesting is that in the old paper bills, there were portraits of important figures in the colonial era, but Macau's current currency bears no faces, only monuments and bank buildings, almost as if the city lacks a figure who can embody its identity after centuries of colonial rule. I then spotted someone who can answer all my questions about this place.
我差不多10年前，那个老人叫我回来这里义工哦。
那我看这里有好多就是那种比较有年代感的一些，是毛主席的一些头像，
也是人家送来的呀。
送来的哦。
所有的东西我自己是很小的，边是政府借给人家用的地方嘛。
OK。
这是业主会很小回来用的嘛。哦。把这里一点点的东西拿来这里陈列，后来我的工友啦、街坊啦，有的是游客啦，他们来了。也是跟你一样跟我交流，我有东西我也拿来这里给你陈列。那幅画是国内的游客拿来的，他第一次来这里参观是跟我交流，阿姨啊，我看你那么多东西，下一次来他就拿来，阿姨我也拿给你在这里陈了。那个树的小朋友。也是一个游客拿来的。
我看还有个小鸟，
小鸟是自己飞来的。我就陈列的时候找出来，人家笑笑，安慰一下。哦，好像我那个舞台呢，老人有老人的看啊，小朋友有小朋友的看，
对，
就不会进来。妈妈没，我们不喜欢了，快点走啊！我们澳门有现金分享的呀，每年有1万嘛，我们人有现金分。猪也在分饼者，我们澳门的人是很幸福的呀。
对呀，这
做猪也是很幸福的。
对，你们澳门这边生活质量应该不错，对吧？像您也是就是澳门土生土长的。
不是，我26岁到澳门，我是中山人，差不多50年了。
那时候跟现在最大的区别是什么呢？
很大区别。以前我来的时候，我是做自己生意的啊。那些葡国人。整天到你的店子去拿钱，你不给钱，他来这天你不给他，你优想他会走，你一定要给他，
就会受欺负。现在就没有了。
现在谁敢来？
对对对，现在您是老大，在这里都是您掌管的。
She was all smiles until we began speaking about life under Portuguese Macau, which I understand could hold some painful experiences. I only wish that more stories like hers were documented. Back then, colonial restrictions on press freedom limited how local Chinese residents could record their histories. Hence, Portuguese language records were prioritized while many Chinese language records never even made it onto official archives. Because of this, Macau's official history is dominated by the Portuguese narrative. So perhaps this sweet lady, along with those that donated items for her curatorship, is playfully making their overlooked experiences seen through this eccentric exhibition. Nearby is Lilau Square, a spot that feels like it's been lifted straight from a quiet Lisbon neighborhood. Once the site of Macau's main natural spring, the Chinese called it Apuaching, or Old Lady's Well, while the Portuguese called it Lilau. There's a saying that whoever drinks from Lilau never forgets Macau, meaning you'll either marry someone here or find your way back. It was one of the first neighborhoods where Portuguese and Macanese families lived alongside Chinese residents. By the 20th century, however, the spring had dried up and the area slowly faded from importance. But today, its restored houses and leafy shade makes Lilau a perfect place for grandparents to gather and children to play. Not far from Lilau Square, I arrived at the Ama Temple, another one of Macau's iconic landmarks. Unfortunately, I just missed the opening times, so we'll have to admire it from afar.
This is the oldest temple in Macau. It was built in 1488 during the Ming Dynasty, a time back in Macau's humble beginnings where it was just a small fishing village. They really revered this goddess that protected their fishermen at sea.
The story goes that when the Portuguese merchants first arrived, they asked local fishermen where they were. The fishermen replied, Amagao, which means the Bay of Ama. The Portuguese misheard the name, but it stuck, so they decided to call this place Macau.
So right across Ama Temple, we have this beautiful body of water, and on this side is Zhuhai. Back in the days, how a lot of people would migrate to Macau during times of famine or war was they would just have to swim through this body of water. During World War II, when the Japanese invaded parts of mainland China as well as Hong Kong, a lot of people sought refuge in Macau because Macau, under Portuguese rules back then, was a neutral party. So this was basically a glimpse of safe haven and hope for a lot of people. Not only did they provide safe haven to the Chinese, but they also provided refuge for a lot of foreign nationals, including Europeans, even Japanese nationals that fled from Hong Kong during the invasion. You know, Macau was basically open doors to all these people, and together they created the fusion that is now Macanese culture.
We're on our way down to an area that's known as Macau's countryside. Along the way, we pass by the casino strip and sky-high compact residential buildings that remind you that Macau is still one of the densest cities in the world. Not long ago, Coloane was a separate island, and it was only joined to the Taipa region of Macau through large-scale land reclamation projects in the late 1990s and the early 2000s. The reclaimed land is now the Cotai Strip that we pass, the hub for modern casinos and resorts. Yet despite its link to modern Macau, Coloane has preserved the slow rhythm of island life. Here, people recognize the familiar faces of neighbors. Pastel-colored houses spill over with tiny gardens, and the sea breeze seems to stretch time for even the most hurried traveler. But Coloane wasn't always so calm. Although the Portuguese had established themselves in Macau by the 1550s, Coloane remained outside of their formal claim until 1864. Before then, the island was little more than a fishing village, and more infamously, a haven for pirates. Its rugged coastline made it the perfect lair for raiders who struck merchant ships and terrorized coastal communities along the Pearl River Delta. One of the most feared pirates in the region at the time was a Chinese female called Cheng Shi. Born into poverty, she rose from prostitution to pirate chiefdom, commanding the largest pirate fleet in the world with 1,800 ships. Defeated by Portuguese troops in 1810, she accepted amnesty and retired to Macau, where she continued her lavish lifestyle. But piracy wouldn't end in Coloane till 100 years later in 1910, when 18 children were kidnapped and the colonial government responded by bombing the island for 10 straight days. Over 300 pirates were captured or fled, marking the official end of piracy in Coloane. Today, a monument in the village center, the Eduardo Marques Square, commemorates that defining victory. Facing the square is a chapel of St. Francis Xavier. Within its walls rest relics of Catholic martyrs, men and women executed for their faith in 17th and 18th centuries during periods when Christianity was outlawed in most of Asia. Nearby is a Southern European-styled library. Originally built as a school in the 1910s, today it continues to be a place where locals gather to read, reflect, or simply escape from the heat of the day. course, no one leaves Cologne without trying the legendary Eggtarts at Lord Stow's bakery. The village is home to its flagship store created in 1989 by British pharmacist turned baker Stow himself. This is a snack that has a perfect caramelized crust like the Portuguese Eggtart and a creamy custard filling that was sweet but not too sweet. Which, if you're Chinese, you know that's the highest compliment you can give to a dessert. With a full tummy and even fuller heart, I left Macau with much more than I expected. There's truly something for everyone here. Beyond the dazzling lights and casinos of the Cotai Strip lies a layered history waiting to be uncovered. Like many modern cities, there's a tug-of-war between history and modernity. And while it may not get the same spotlight as neighboring Hong Kong, Macau deserves just as much love for its resilience throughout history's ebbs and flows, its openness as a port of refuge for those that sought it, and its mosaic identity that continues to shimmer with layers of its past.